I'm excited to welcome back Steve Nygren, the founder of Serenbe, a pioneer and a visionary. Welcome back, Steve. It's great to see you again.
Well, thank you. Looking forward to today's conversation.
Yes, so you have your very first book coming out called Start in Your Backyard, Transforming Where We Live with Radical Common Sense. Where did this come from?
Well, of course, I am not a developer by design. This was a reaction to actually save the land around us, literally our backyard. And that turned into rezoning 60 square miles as we pulled neighbors in to talk about what is your vision. And it was very varied, from let's develop it because we're going to cash in to I don't want this land touched. And that's a very common thing that's happened around the country. And then when I realized that to demonstrate what we were talking about could happen, it was my responsibility to take my own land and show how you could have development and preservation. And so as I've been on this journey, you start unraveling all of the things that community should be, really looking to 100 years ago more than what's happened today. And what's happened, I believe, is anyone developing or the way we lived, we looked at whole systems. Today, we're in siloed decisions, and we don't understand the connection. And we're very isolated because various reasons through decades have taken us to this place. And what we've done in Serenbe is a bunch of common sense. None of this is deep science. Gosh, should children connect with older people and vice versa? And does that enrich both of their lives? Absolutely. Yet, as we saw in the pandemic, both of those groups are in what I call prisons, gated one way or another from each other. So things like that are just common sense. Connecting with neighbors. We are so car centric that we don't walk anymore. And that creates a disconnection from running into people, that spontaneous thing that most people have fond memories of from college campuses. We don't have those kind of relationships and spontaneity in our lives anymore. And so it's just everything that we started uncovering, blueberry bushes at the crosswalks. None of this is hard stuff. And it makes common sense when you think about it. Why have we not done any of this? Why have we gradually stepped away from these simple things?
So, Steve, I've got to tell you that I feel like we in America in general are a heartbroken nation. We are heartbroken that the healthcare doesn't work. The environment is in jeopardy. We're heartbroken because we're lonely. All of the studies show this. And I have a lot of friends that live in Serenbe, and they are just like their lives have really been changed. One of the residents and I had a call. I had a conversation. We were out and having coffee, and she said, "Allison, what is it? What is it like when you go to see your friends?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Do you drive to them? Do you have to arrange things?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's kind of hard actually to get together with friends. You have to match up schedules. They live across town. Like there's a lot that goes into it. They're kids." And she had moved from the city. I live in the city too, to Serenbe. And she said, I feel like my life has completely changed because the relationships that I have from being a resident at Serenbe have completely transformed my life. And what is interesting is she used the word, it feels like college again, because in college, you live close, right? Like you live in a dorm, you all live together, you're living in a community. But the chance to actually deeply invest in relationships because of proximity, because of time, because of convenience, of just being surrounded by each other was a common theme of, she said that the kind of relationships I have now, like nobody locks their doors. Everyone is looking out for each other. We all want to help each other. It sounds like paradise. And so I'm astounded by the vision that you had 20 years ago to begin to create a community that now is flourishing for so many people that are there, but also giving a light to something we just can't see anymore. So back to the heartbreak, Steve. We are heartbroken, but we don't always see the forest through the trees. All puns intended, Mr. Nature.
That's right.
How do you even can you rewind us to the beginning of why this became so important to you?
Well, I was on what I called the treadmill of life. And 30 years ago. And everyone thought I was kind of crazy when we stepped away from the city. I sold my company, but our children were 6, 8, and 10. And I found that they wanted to come to the farm, where at that point we rented the main house out and we would stay
And
in the
back up,
shack.
there was, like, undeveloped land, right? Like, there
Yeah,
was,
yeah,
like, a big mass
this
of
was
land, an
this is
old
kind of the
farm.
this is the last rural area of Metro Atlanta that had not been developed. All development went north and then west and then east, but nothing really came southwest. And it had poor schools, it had no services, there were no roads coming through it anywhere. So people couldn't even visualize it. Still today, have trouble thinking where we are, because we are 25 minutes from airport, 35 minutes from downtown Atlanta, and yet it's a rural countryside. So we had found it as on a whim on a Saturday afternoon drive to show our kids farm animals when they were 3, 5, and 7. And we pulled in, and this farm that had something for sale, we pre-called and clear that we weren't interested in buying anything. And of course, anyone with something for sale says, "Come on." We arrived. They had the Shetland pony saddled, and we bought the farm. And I
Wow.
imagined that we would come out a couple Saturday afternoons a month. And so we rented the old farmhouse out. My wife fixed the shack in the back. And to my amazement, it's where everyone wanted to come every weekend. Now, we had a grand house right in the center of Atlanta, Ansley Park, one of the great in town neighborhoods. We had
Mm.
the pool, matching Barbie cars, Barbie room. I mean, why would we leave? And yet everyone gravitated to the country. And so that was my value shift. And I think more people understand what I went through post pandemic, because a lot of people had that same reevaluation during the panic. And some changed their lives. Some have now stepped back into sort of the treadmill that maybe they're not happy with and have lost that hopelessness. So that's what brought us on this journey. And then in my 6th year of retirement, we became concerned about urban sprawl. And I certainly didn't want to pack up and move further away, because we love what a city offers. We like foreign films and ethnic food and sports and everything that a city. And so then
Yeah.
that's really started this journey. Is why is development such a problem, and why does it really sap the energy out of where we live? And so it's the interstate highway, and in the book I go back and start talking about how did we get here, and it's all unintended consequences from the interstate highway that was supposed to develop to move troops across the country by Eisenhower. Well, it's never been used for that, but it has facilitated urban sprawl. And then we started, because we were car centric, and we started separating all of our retail from our housing, and so now we have shelter and housing elsewhere, forcing us to drive cars anywhere we go. So as you were mentioning, it becomes difficult. And the suburban model isn't pedestrian focused. So this is why kids play with each other, generally have to arrange play dates, and the parents turn into chauffeurs. And so
Yeah.
this whole thing builds to a stressful lifestyle. And so I really started looking at all that and said, well, hey, why does it have to be there? It never used to be this way. How did we develop? How did we live in the past? And why can't we create that? And so that was my deep dive. And, surprised then that there are rules and regulations that have changed that make it difficult. You see why there isn't more. And so this is why I really wanted to write the book, to show it can be done. It takes common sense. It takes a person with passion. And so why spend all of our time worrying about what we can't change? Instead, let's look around us and what can we change?
And I think even before, we were recording, Steve, you had talked about people feeling hopeless. And I'm curious about, you have set this model, that people are really investing in. You've built out this entire ecosystem, this entire world that connects people. Can you describe what Serenbe is like? How did this vision begin? And how is it different than what you had originally thought?
Well, number one, I originally didn't imagine being developing our land and inviting people into our sacred farm and our sacred space, if
Yeah.
you will. But then I realized, number one, the only way we could save it was to show how you could have balanced growth. The countryside of England was my model. We had a dear friend. We took the kids there every year during my retirement. And we understood that their land plans that they put in after World War II, because the island couldn't afford urban sprawl. This was a model with a lot of people living in these hamlets, towns, and villages, and yet it felt very country. And so that was the model for the physical plan. And then as you start looking at towns 100 years ago, everyone had a front porch, which has disappeared because of air conditioning and the popularity of back decks. And so we put front porches everywhere, and we pulled the houses close to the street so that when you're sitting on your front porch, you could actually have a conversation with people walking by on the sidewalk. We have mail centers in each area, and they're generally near like one is next to the trampoline in a gazebo, another one's next to the coffee shop. Another one's next to the pool. They're all located in places that people are going and coming for other reasons. And so the joke is it takes 2 hours to get your mail at Serenbe. Well, it's all the people you run into, the friendships, the travel clubs, the romances that have all happened with people on the street on the way to their mailboxes or to pick up mail that day. And so these are just simple things. Everyone at Serenbe are exposed to the same news media. And we have people with every political view, multiple race, sexual orientation. So we are. This isn't some club that you have to be a certain way to get into. This is public, and we have a diverse people. We find no matter what your political party, no matter where you come from, you want happy kids, you want healthy kids, right? We want fresh air. We all want the same thing, and we become into a tribe mentality. So we really don't see that because we see our neighbors rather than issues of tribes, and people for who they are, not an association with a bigger ideology. And that makes a real difference when you actually are connecting as humans on a regular basis. And it's just that being on a walkable community does that more than anything I can mention, because it gets you out there. And now we've been fortunate, everything, our schools here, our family doctors, the pediatrician, the dentist. So I have
It's
seven
like Little House
grandkids.
on the Prairie, it feels like.
It, and it's very real. And people say, oh, how unusual or how utopia. Isn't it sad that we have created places that are now so far removed from these simple, common daily activities that it feels like a utopia, that it feels something special? Because these are all things we respond to and they were essential part of our normal lives 100 years ago. And we've sanitized our zoning. We have created lifestyles that doesn't happen. So as I was saying, my seven grandkids, luckily my three daughters all brought their northern husbands home. And so everybody's right here.
Wow.
They're rarely in car seats. Now, that one, for people with young children, just the idea of not ever being in a car seat. We're on foot, we're on bicycles, we're on golf
Wow.
carts, but not in cars.
You know
That
what's
one
interesting
thing alone.
about that too is that in 2020, when the pandemic happened, people really took stock of where they living. And a
Yes.
lot of young families moved to Serenbe. They're all 5 years old now. And
Yeah.
they're all like going to school on it. They're all connected. The trampoline thing, Steve, is amazing that there are trampolines that are built into the grounds, like into the earth. So you can go and like bounce as adults, as kids, whatever it is. It really does feel utopian. It
It is,
does.
but it's available to anyone. And not you don't have to move to Serenbe if you just start taking stock of your own neighborhood and your own lives.
Well, let's talk about that. You had talked about you can change global situations on a local level. That's what this podcast serves, right? Like, how do you change the culture? And it's usually through personal reinvention. Where do you even begin to start if you don't have access to move to Serenbe? You live in an urban place. Life feels really stretchy. You're on the go all the time. You're exhausted. You're burned out. Where do you even begin? And what makes the biggest difference? How do you start in your backyard?
Well, I think, if you're living in a car-centric suburban area and you're driving your car into your garage, going into your house, your mail's delivered to your front porch or to the mailbox at the end of your sidewalk. Those are all issues that are creating isolation. So where do you begin? There was one neighborhood that they were talking about how the kids always came home immediately after school. And then they were concerned about security. So everyone's locked into their houses and the kids are on computers, right? This is a very common thing that's happening.
Mm.
So I suggested they create a front porch society. And if they didn't have a front porch, you can
Hmm.
create a terrace or patio in your front. And then as a neighborhood, as a street, agree that one household is going to be on their front porch every afternoon as school's letting out. And so there's eyes on the street, which is the biggest thing. And so then there's safety feeling for the kids to be out connecting with one another. And so that is something that people can organize amongst their own neighbors in their own neighborhoods, their own streets, and starts changing it. There's a tendency for all kinds of reasons to fence our backyards. So unless you have a pool or some reason, and you could make it smaller. So what if everyone started taking down their fences and had common play areas, common gardens, start growing your own food? We've lost the understanding of what real food tastes like because most of it's picked while it's still ripening, and it ripens in trucks and ends up on the shelf hundreds or thousands of miles from when it was growing.
Wow.
Bring back a local gardening culture to your neighborhood. There's plenty of research coming out now that uh, our lawns, we know that our lawns absorb a lot of water. It always drove me crazy in the city when our neighbors, I'd come home twice a year, and there on their lawn was this sign, do not walk for 24 hours. They just had their treatment for
Yeah.
fertilizer and weeds. And I thought, oh my gosh, my cat is running across that lawn and right into the house. What's that cat bringing? What's in the air? And if they're required to post that sign, there's toxic things being put in the land next to me. And what is that? And we wonder why we have depression and cancer. Most neighborhoods are chemicalizing where they're living. And this is affecting us. So rip out the lawn, put natural landscaping in it. Most people, when they drive down the streets of Serenbe, they don't even realize
No, they don't,
we
because it's
don't.
so beautifully done. They're use stones, they're short, lawns, and even in your book, Steve, because you had mentioned that the last time I had interviewed you, and then I was like, "I didn't even notice," and then I looked around, there are no lawns, but in your book, you talked about, like, these big, prestigious, sprawling lawns, right? These beautiful bright green that are treated for weeds and they're treated for bugs. They're treated for everything. They're beautifully manicured. But it feels like a barrier that you're never talking to your neighbors. And there are a lot of people in the suburbs that have no idea who their neighbors are, because they're not outside. Cited in your book, there's an EPA survey or a survey that was done through the EPA that Americans spend 87% of their time indoors, plus 6% of time in a vehicle. And what I think is interesting about the way that Serenbe was designed is the edible plants, like you were talking
That's
about,
right.
right? The edible. And, like there are times when we'll go out in the streets and the kids will find berries. And I'm like, no, 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 no. You don't know if it's safe.
That's right.
Like it would not even occur to me to ever eat it unless it was like a strawberry farm, a
Right.
blueberry farm, right? So like just having that, for me, it was a little bit of a mindset shift of all the ways that Serenbe is set up where, like I stayed there for a couple of days. There's no lights. There's no lights outside at night.
That's right.
Because
Well, the lights that are out there are shooting down to the ground where you need it. And all of our artist designed street lights are almost pieces of sculpture. You forget that they're street lights, but we have night sky regulations, dark sky regulations. So nothing no light can escape. And so we see a full
what does
cascade
that
of
mean?
stars. It means that if you have a light,
Yeah.
it cannot shine into the atmosphere. So it has to have a hood or something that's at a 45-degree angles that holds everything to the ground or the surfaces, or it has to be under a covered porch and all those things. It makes a huge difference. There's no reason we shouldn't be able to see stars in our cities and how that
Mm.
inspires the awe of stars. But we've allowed this crazy pollution for light to go places we don't need it. And so simple little things like this make such a difference.
Tell me about the statistics around children that are living at Serenbe and asthma.
We have 240 kids living here now full time, and there are no reported signs of asthma, which is statistically impossible in the United States today.
What?
Yes,
That's insane.
I think it's largely because we're not chemicalizing where we live. I don't think we realize the impact of that. And 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 maybe not directly with asthma, but our entire health is our nervous system.
Yeah.
The noise of the blowers and the mowers that's constantly on the weekends when you might be want to be outside, it's terrible. And then the heating and cooling compressors, air compressors, we require all geothermal because it's silent. So if
What
you
does
walk through our
geothermal mean?
geothermal is when you use water to heat and cool your homes rather than air. And so it is a pipe, and so it's recirculated water, and most of ours are a pipe that goes into the ground. And so you're using that recirculated water from the constant temperature of the earth down a certain number of feet. And so because that's a smaller unit that's in a piece of the house. And so you don't have this exterior air conditioning blowing air, pulling air in and out. That's very noisy versus this quiet system of water just moving through pipes. There's simple things, there's simple technologies out there. We just don't know about them, or we aren't doing the research to do that. And it makes a huge difference. I mean, you walk down our streets, these are dense, we have dense neighborhoods as you see. I mean, houses are close, and you hear the birds, you hear the breeze of the trees, you have things that affect our nervous system in a positive way. It's simple things, but it's things that we have just totally don't have anymore. And post pandemic, a lot of research is now coming, and it was there before, but I think it's been highlighted, is mental health, improved mental health is connection to nature and to one another. And yet we've been creating places to live that separate us from both. And then we
Mm.
wonder why we're depressed, why we feel hopeless. Well, just look around. The things that feed us, we have isolated ourselves from.
So you end the book with getting started. What is your advice to someone who's feeling cynical or stuck?
Well, number one is, what are your talents? Instead of expecting someone else to come and change your life,
Mm.
what could you change as an individual? And then what's driving you crazy, and how can you apply that talent to whatever it is? For some, maybe you or your kids have an obesity problem. Maybe it is asthma. How can you address your talents to start changing your neighborhood? Maybe it's a non-civil communities. What can you do to start neighborhood coffees to talk about some of these things? For some, instead of complaining about the local government, then run for a school board, run for a city council. A huge part of your audience is female. We need
Yeah.
more women in leadership on every level. Yet I was looking at the research, and it was the number of elected offices. And this is from school boards to your HOAs, to your city, your state governments, whatever. If you look at all the people who put their names forward, not looking at who gets elected, just put their names forward to run, only 30% of them are women. So what can we do? And I know it's tough if a woman is balancing her career and
Yeah.
kids. Running for public office is how can we make that easier? How can we get some of the older people now that don't have all those trappings to actually, instead of thinking about going into retirement, let's step into service and run for some of these offices. We need responsible people to step into the circle rather than being disillusioned and stepping out of the
Oh,
circle.
I love that. But I also feel like we are at a political moment, right? Where there's so much misinformation, right? Like There's the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again movement. There's a lot of misinformation, disinformation. It's hard to figure out, where do I spend my time and energy when I care about this? And, if there are people that don't have access to be able to move to a community like Serenbe, but they do want to make a difference, the thought of like changing laws feels really big. What would it look like to begin maybe in your home? Maybe there are small things that people can do, whether it's edible landscape or, you know, uh, ripping up the lawn and putting in a more natural landscape, but also to start inviting other people to learn about maybe people surrounding them that can start to create a movement.
Well, absolutely. And I think because of our social media, because of our media, anything that happens on the other side of the world, on the other side of the country, feels like it's in our backyard.
Yeah, it does.
And that's just not the case. In fact, the statistics show, for instance, that crime on children, especially children you don't know, is nowhere near what it was in the 50s. We know about everything that happens no matter where it is. And so we're fearful and we lock our kids down. And we're
Yes.
creating a fearful society by doing all these things. And so rather than looking at the global issues and the global conversation, bring that back to the neighborhood. What's
Yeah.
going on in your neighborhood? What are the concerns? I think you brought it up. If you start talking to your neighbors, start having coffees. That's great. Let's discuss. What's bugging everybody, but don't talk about global issues. Don't talk about national issues. Talk about your neighborhood, your kids. What are the issues that your neighbors on your street are dealing with? And what can you collectively do? And then individual, who's the leader in that group? And if we could just pull things back to local, we can change the world. We're never going to change it fretting about trying to create a difference
Mm.
on all these bigger things, because that's very hard for an individual. You have to literally create a movement to start changing it. But you can change your street. You can change the culture, and you might have a diversity. It might be those hard conversations. Step into those hard conversations and it will create a deeper relationship. We've had time and time, and we haven't shied away from some of these deep, difficult decisions.
I'm curious about the big bets that you have taken and people in your community have taken as well, as this, this community and this idea, this biophilic society has evolved. What are the big bets?
The big bets?
Yeah.
Well, the big bets, I guess, it just the idea of doing this. And I realized we were going completely against the trend. But by the time, luckily, I had a friend, Ray Anderson, and he brought carpet squares to America and then realized that his company was one of the polluters. And after reading Paul Hawkins' book, totally changed his corporate culture. And in the
Mm.
90s, he became the first U.S. industrialist to put his company on a carbon neutral footprint. It was a dear friend of ours way before that. And so as I was struggling with how to save this greater area, I went to Ray and I said, all the smart people who could help us save this area. What are the principles? And so Ray, along with the Rocky Mountain Institute, invited 23 thought leaders here in September of 2000. And I came away from that 2-day meeting. It was all documented by Georgia Tech, disillusioned because I was hearing
Mm.
about the global problems and all these things that was going to happen with energy and soils and water. And it was just, okay, I wanted people to share how I was going to save this backyard. I didn't want to hear all the problems of the world. And Ray beautifully then sent me for the next 6 months to visit here and there and to look at solutions. I came back and said, Ray, I can't believe nobody's dealing with this stuff. Who's applying all these issues? And during that weekend, there were some solutions to these global problems, but it was all global. Who's applying to this local? Looked at me and said, no one, that's why you need to. And suddenly it was that I had not taken this on. This wasn't my
Why
idea
not
of how I was
you?
going to save my
Yeah.
backyard. And so the first thing was that realization that I was actually going to lead our area into a new model. And was I willing to do that? I was comfortably into retirement. And then when I realized that investors, even banks weren't going to loan me money, I literally had to leverage our entire life. And our girls were getting ready to go to college. And I remember the night so well. I called them together and I said, I feel we need to do this. And I put money away for your college education, but we could lose everything. And it was a
Mm.
huge commitment to step into this unknown. They remember it, oh, dad said he's going to do this. Of course they were supportive of it, but I thought long and hard. And during the recession, we came to the edge of doing exactly that. So number one was just stepping in to that uncomfortable place that leadership and change is. But oh my goodness, what rewards are we going to have if we keep going along with what we know is dysfunctional? That
Yeah.
that and how can we look at our children and grandchildren? The life I live is because of the sacrifices and the decisions my ancestors have made over several generations, and I can look back at that. And I wonder, what are the young people today going to think about our generation? The baby boomers, in the 60s, we were going to solve the world with free sex, rock and roll, and drugs. And it
Did it
didn't
work?
work out too well, right? But this is the same generation that became the greed generation of the 90s. And so the baby boomers who now are
Hmm,
stepping into elderhood,
interesting.
it's the only groups that have lived at the two extremes of this pendulum. And so my hope now is we step into the retirement, we can come back to center and take responsibility to move forward. And our young people, our people that are 20, 30, they're moving into their lives, they've grown up in a fragile world. And they are concerned that they're not waiting for somebody else to come along. And we need to join them in creating some of these solutions, whether it's in your neighborhood or your state. What can we do? I think we all agree we're dysfunctional. We're sicker, we're
Yeah.
more depressed. We can all agree on that. No
Mhm.
matter what we think the reason is, we can all agree on it. So let's just stop being worried about it and step into where we are locally on our own streets, in our own neighborhood, in our own towns.
I'm curious, what have you learned that you were surprised about through this process?
That number one, how common sense these issues are, that we did not have to do deep science. We just had to have the courage to move forward with simple things like having no lawn. How simple is that? And yet, why aren't more people doing that? It's what I was surprised at, how stuck we are as a society and how fearful we are to change. I think many times about if you were on a raft or a canoe or something in a stream moving, it takes a lot of energy to stay where you are. Yet we're fearful to move forward for where that stream might be taking us. And so we're
That's true.
spending a lot of energy just staying where we are instead of letting go and sort of moving into the unknown and be part of that change. And it surprised me of how stuck we are as a society, that we're not making some obvious changes, even when we have
What
the
are
information.
What are some simple changes? Well, I think about you, Steve, when you were talking about your, you grew up in Colorado. You grew
Right.
up on farms in nature. And, you talk about a story of wanting to get out of there. You wanted to, like, it was more work than it was fun, right?
That's
And
right.
you wanted to get to the city. But as you discovered and rediscovered nature, then you started to feel the effects of it. I'm wondering, what are some simple things that can allow us to maybe taste and move closer to a society where we're like, no, we could do this. We can do this incrementally. What are some things that we can do that can invite us back into nature, invite us back into our more natural state of being, of connection? What are some things that we can do?
Well, number one is to look around your own yard and your own street and how natural is it versus man made. And what can you do about that? You start looking at your diets. There's a movement to support local farmers market. It needs
Yeah,
to be, that's a boutique. We need to really figure out how we're going to look at a regional food system. It's one of the most vulnerable things we have. And we need to start really understanding what we're putting into our body and how it affects our daily life. And it's local. It doesn't have to be organic certified. That's great, but local is your key. And if we start really eating local, it's going to support a local food system, not just farmers market. That's the boutique. It has to get bigger and deeper, that of bringing that local ag movement back. And so you start really When you go out, you question about that. You question your local stores and grocery stores. And if you're buying online, where is this food coming from? Start being curious about where this food is coming from and how it's being grown and how many days does it have to spend in a box getting to you. It's going to lose its nutrition and its taste value. If we
Mm.
just start looking at our atmosphere where we live and what we're putting in our bodies, those two things alone can really make you curious enough to start changing what those are. And those are two of the biggest things. And through that, you're going to also connect with people and neighbors as you work together and not be isolated in solving this. I bet you could take a survey and most of the people around you are feeling the same frustration and hopelessness. And what a difference it is if you just start a cause, start doing something about it. It changes your mental attitude. Action is a huge antidote to depression.
Ooh, I love that. What a perfect way to end. So your book comes out when?
October 7th. And you can
So
pre-order now, which we love. You can on Amazon or local bookstores. Pre-orders really help because then that sends a message to your bookstores and the publishers that there is interest in this message, that we can take charge of our own lives.
and the name of the book is?
The name of the book is Start in Your Own Backyard, Transforming Where We Live with Radical Common Sense.
I love it. How can people get in touch with you, Steve?
We're setting up we're on social media and you'll see various things coming out, and we're going to be setting up a web page and an email, but you can go right now to the Serenbe webpage, and that's serenbe.com. And we also have Nygren Placemaking, which is our consulting team. And that's coming out the end of this month. And you can go on to Nygren Placemaking, and this is for developers, but anyone can attend the 2.5 day conference to walk the streets, walk the paths, and learn from all of our team that has helped make this happen, from our government leaders that we convinced to follow this radical idea of different zoning, to bankers and local officials. And so you really can follow our journey and talk to the people that we've met along the way.
And just to, not dim your light at all, Steve, what you have done is nothing short of remarkable, and you have inspired communities all over the world. Your visionary style and this pioneer of like really taking this vision, building it out, making it real, proving it out is really changing and inspiring the world. So I am honored to have you back on the show. I can't wait to get this book in the hands of people that are listening now. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything that you're doing for the community, for the world, for the generations behind us.
Well, thank you for your interest and for using your skills to talk to your community. I mean, what you're doing is exactly what I'm talking about, and sharing these ideas.
Phew.
And our people will send you all the contact information that you can include in your podcast information.
Beautiful. Sounds great. Thank you, Steve.
Enjoyed the conversation. Thank you. And now come back and see us again.